Okay, welcome to the NDIS podcast with Chris Hall. And today I've got a wonderful guest, Ian Jordan from Kinkera Community, who are a really cutting edge SDA developer. And today we're going to do a state of the industry in the context of the NDIS and what's happening in specialist disability accommodation. So, Ian, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Chris. It's really great to be with you finally on the podcast. I've
Yeah, look,
listened
we
to your shows. It's really
yeah, yeah,
fantastic.
we
Yeah.
met in the industry a few years ago, didn't we? I was like, you got to come on, you got to come on. So like, I'm really excited to pick your brains today. Look, now I know Kinkera does many special things, but I'd love to just kind of start off with a bit of a state of the union, so to speak, in terms of what's happening in SDA, because I think that with someone like yourself, you've got your background in property development. Of course, that's got all the stages of looking for the land, doing the planning, figuring out the pricing model. You've got to figure out your return on investment. You've got to get people, occupied in the premises. There's a whole process to all of that. And I suppose let me start off with the idea of the SDA demand data. So, or data, if you're from Australia. I say data because I'm from England.
Yeah, good old data.
Data. So yeah, for other providers that are outside of SDA, they can look on the other areas of data from the NDIS and say, oh, we've got this number of participants in the geography with these disabilities. There is something called the SDA demand data, information, and that tells you things like, what the demand is in particular cities or LGAs, which is wonderful. So here's my pointed question though: what's happening in the industry broadly from your perspective in terms of, I guess, the overdevelopment risk? Because I think that lots of SDA developers could look at that and go, oh, look at that, Liverpool's gone gangbusters, or Melbourne's hot right now, let's build there. How do you manage that as a business? Because I think there's always that overdevelopment risk, isn't there?
Yeah, and that is a big risk, especially with SDA when you're building very bespoke dwellings, and you're potentially paying more as a developer to build those dwellings. You know, the construction cost in those particular dwellings is much higher. So the risk, therefore, is higher. In terms of the development risk and overdevelopment, a lot of what we see in terms of, and look, this is a generalization.
Mm-hmm.
I think, first of all, SDA is a new sector. It really is a nascent part of NDIA and type of dwelling for Australians. The data itself, I think that the NDIA are doing the very best they can and picking the data points the very best they can. However, if you take a step back and look more broadly at, say, development application information in the city of Brisbane, it's quite widely known that about a third of development applications that are approved will actually end up getting developed. So if you sort of look at that and go, okay, well, there's only a third of those properties actually ever get developed, and right now, because of various factors, it's going to be even less than that. It's interesting to then start translating that into the SDA sector to then better understand what's coming. So, in terms of initial approvals and approvals, we're actually seeing that potentially less than 50% of those will actually get developed. So you then start looking at those numbers potentially with a different light.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a long lag. You know, you don't develop a property overnight. It doesn't happen. We would love to be able to do that, and I'm sure participants and family members, etc., would love that as well.
Mm.
However, what we see is a long period of time to get a property to completion stage. It's generally three years or so to make that happen.
Yes.
So that that lag in terms of that becomes even more frightening as a developer to then go in and say, right, I'm going to get that now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that also in terms of State of the Union, what's evolved over the last, say, well, multiple years, there's definitely been the mum and pop self-managed super fund trend, which I think has been a little dangerous, if I may be so bold to suggest, in the sense that people get a misinterpretation of what the actual returns could be. They might have dodgy builders involved, and they get all the promised the world, and then the obvious kind of point is that fine, you can build your beautiful home as an SDA property, but then how the hell are you going to manage it afterwards, right? Because it's a complex organism to line up clients as tenants, because there's a just like any NDIS provider, And there's a myriad of factors going on. It does, your disability, the way that evolves. Are you moving from one place to the other? Have you been in hospital? Who are your housemates going to be if you're going to have housemates? It's just so much stuff. So that basically, what I would say as a business coach is, I'd say if you are in the mum and pop category of thinking, oh, SDA is brilliant, I'll get into that, I'd be really careful because you've got the factors you've described, and then you've got to fill those seats up, so to speak. It's really risky. So I think my observation is that that's been one of the more dangerous trends. I very much welcome the boutique ones and the larger organizations like yourself that know what they're doing. They're already established. Like what do you have any comment on that in terms of the bifurcation between those two groups?
Probably, look, I do, and I agree that it's a risk not only for those investors. I
Yes.
think it's a risk for the sector itself, because a lot of this will then end up with people losing their money,
Mm.
and that then has a negative blowback into the industry, into our sector.
Mm.
So I don't like it. What I have been seeing is that the vast majority of properties that are being sold to mum and dads are house and land packages in very, very new developments with exceptionally small amount of infrastructure. And, God bless choice and control. Effectively, it is highly likely to mean that participants, their families won't go there.
Yep.
Why would they go to an area where there's no shops? Why would they go to an area where public transport is infrequent? It's hard to get around. It's hours from anywhere. And whilst the dwelling itself might suit its purpose, it doesn't provide that entire package, which is what the SDA's intent is looking for. So my concern for mum and dad is that they are, as you say, they are being promised a lot of stuff.
Mm.
Not many of the property marketers out there will talk about vacancy.
Mm.
They won't talk about oversupply, as you've said. And there are examples in sort of northern and western suburbs of Melbourne where there are significant numbers of properties coming online, all in the same suburb. And that's not the intent of, the NDIA. The intent really is for people in the community to be reflective of people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
If the intent of NDIA was to create institutions, then they would have done that. It's
Yes.
very clear that they do not want institutions. We
Yep.
we want people to be living in all suburbs. It doesn't mean that people with disability should be pushed out to outer ring suburbs just because of it.
That's a really good distinction philosophically, and I know Kinkera in particular has got a lovely ethos behind the way that you develop your own properties. And just to kind of add a parallel segue to this, because I often interact with providers that are setting up for the first time, they're becoming registered or they're growing or whatever, they're going through the life cycle journey of I'm a new provider, what should I do? And they go, ooh, $ SIL, but they don't realize that it takes a lot of effort, a lot of competency, and for good reasons, to get really good at your operations, really good at your process and your compliance, and genuinely being able to do complex physical health in a lot of places. And that takes time, right? So I kind of always say, I get that you want to get there, but sometimes you might need to wait 18 months for your registration, so get good in the meantime, and remember that that's not the be and end all of everything, because there are other avenues to get, growth to your business where someone doesn't necessarily even have to have SIL. And the reason I tell that parallel, Ian, is that I think the same happens for the newer businesses that go, ooh, this SDA thing's great too. So they go, ooh, SIL SDA, let's do both. The one thing I'd say philosophically, and again, trending, is that if you look at Alliance 20 in the top 25, I'd say all of them now are doing the separation for good reason, to say the place that you live should be different from the services that you provide. So that genuinely, if you're not happy with your service provider, which can happen, that doesn't impact the place that you live. Would you agree that that's, again, the macro trend, that your tenancy agreement is separate from your services agreement? Very much so, and should be.
Yeah, it's not only the trend. I mean, obviously, I think it was end of last year, the NDIA came out
Yep.
quite categorically and said that they want separation.
Yes.
And it's been in legislation since the NDIA was born.
Yes.
So many times we've seen the provision of care and accommodation leading to far worse outcomes for people with disability in a range of reasons and issues. I think that the choice and control around your accommodation and your care definitely needs to be separated.
100%.
We have examples in our properties where, and this is a very, very interesting discussion because, well, I, we have four townhouses as an extreme example, where each one of those townhouses has a different service provider.
Yep.
Now, that's because the participants have their own choice of control, and those participants have decided, for their various reasons, that they want different service provision. What that does do, however, it doesn't allow for potentially shared support.
Yes.
It then puts pressure back onto those service providers because it's not the most efficient way of providing those services, etc. So there are pros and cons to choice and control for all reasons. If you're purely looking at economic, then obviously choice and control wouldn't really stand up. However, because we're looking at it a different lens, I mean, really the lens that we're looking at it through is what is the highest and best use in terms of life, and what are we doing in terms of humanitarian outcome. Really, we want people with disability to have the choice of where they want to live and how their care is provided.
Exactly. That's a perfect link into concierge, OOA, etc. So I'd love to kind of unpack that a little bit. So for those that might not be unaware, in SDA, you've got a typical 10+1 model. That's one of the kind of classic ranges. But again, there's differences now that are more blended. So in 10+1, you might typically have 10 new apartment buildings and maybe the 1-bed apartments, 2-bed apartments, whatever. And then that +1 is the OOA. So that's the overnight, and that is the unplanned services, right? So when it comes to someone's NDIS plan, as well as your normal budget to pay the SDA developer, you've got stuff under that slither, and you've also got a slither of funding typically for paying for unplanned services through OOA, right? So again, for those that don't know, what that basically means is you can have a SIL provider A or whatever doing this, but technically you can have a different provider that's the unplanned OOA that essentially sits in that 11th place as their 24/7 office, so that if you pull your alarm or need support in the middle of the night, you're literally sharing that cost across 10 people's plans, and you've got that one place to help the whole unit block. I think it's a brilliant model, right? And I think it's very necessary. I guess let me again talk about trends, because you've got the 10+1. That's quite common for the big developments. You mentioned townhouses. I'm also seeing sometimes I don't know if I call them boutique ones, where they've got the four units or the 6 units or whatever. What are you seeing, and what are you choosing to focus on? Or tell me what Kinkera's attitude to the development is of that. Are you going just all in on 10+1, or are you doing 10+1 plus townhouses? What's your approach, and how do you decipher?
So I think the 10+1, I think on the books looks like a fantastic model, and when it's executed well, it is a fantastic model.
Yep.
And this falls back to what we were just discussing there, which is SIL sustainability or service provision sustainability.
Yep.
And the money that a service provider would get for only doing their OOA, they literally would lose money if that was the only thing that they were providing.
Yeah.
So for a service provider to be adequately rewarded for providing that particular service, which is the impromptu needs, they really need sort of a minimum of 4 participants choosing their service.
Yes.
Out of those other 10.
Yes.
So there is a fiscal or economic tension there in terms of how do we ensure that the service provider that's providing the OOA is not only chosen and accepted by the majority of participants, it is their choice, but how do you then make sure that that service provider is also earning enough income from the other service provision to be able to generate that whole service?
Yes.
Because I think what's been happening, and it really is an interesting discussion. the greater efficiencies that come into the industry as we, dare I say it, use that dirty word, move towards privatisation within the sector. Effectively, uh, and I'm not talking about profit. Like a lot of people sort of keep talking about profit in the sector, and certainly as a PTY Ltd profit for purpose company, you do want to make profit. But the idea of making profit is for sustainability, so that you can provide more services. In our case, we can provide more dwellings. There's a range of different things that profit allow you to achieve. In terms of service provision, we don't want to be in a position where OOAs can't be stood up because there is a financial penalty because they're not earning enough money to be able to provide the service. This is what's leading to many of the larger organisations that are carrying significant costs, and they're unable to provide these services anymore because it's just too costly. So we need to come up with a balance in terms of the OOA. Now, in terms of our provision, we work with a range of different service providers. We do all different dwelling types, and we cover all categories. We actually have a more specific focus on robust. So this is psychosocial and complex behaviour participants. And we find different models in different areas. We also do regional. We found when we were doing our research, my business partner, who's a doctorate in accounting, very, very good background in terms of data and data analysis. We pulled apart all of that information and all of that data and created our own data sets to indicate where we felt the greatest demand was.
Yep.
Now, SDA, and we're a fair way into this conversation, and we haven't sort of really discussed what SDA is. And what I'd like to say, use this moment to say specialist disability accommodation is a defined term under the NDIA. It will only ever suit, or only 6% of people with disability is likely to qualify for SDA. So it's only a very, very small percentage of the total population of people with disability that will ever get SDA. It's a very, very small.
It is a small, yes.
So unfortunately, what I've heard and I've seen in some instances, even with NDIA itself, that specialist disability accommodation as a term actually, interestingly, gets used as any accommodation that might be used for somebody with disability.
Okay.
So it gets almost misappropriated as the coverall.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say SIL homes.
Yep.
As an example. These are often general market properties that are rented just in any old suburb.
Yep.
It has people with disability living in them, but it's then termed specialist disability accommodation when it doesn't actually qualify. So the important thing when we are discussing specialist disability accommodation is to understand that they are very, very specific dwellings built for a specific purpose for specific people.
Absolutely. And I'd love to circle back to the OOA thing for a little bit again, if I may, because let's imagine you're a newbie in business and you're trying to understand how the model works, right? And so you mentioned about the viability of OOA, for example. So is it correct that in someone's individual NDIS budget, let's say you've got 10 participants, they're moving into 10 units or whatever, is it always the same amount? Are they getting about $78,000 or something? Is that roughly the right figure in terms of if they choose to use the OOA, they can assign that 78 grand to the OOA provider? Is that about the right number?
Not necessarily.
Really not.
It does vary. It does vary. And not only does it vary, people who move in might not even qualify for OOA.
Oh, that's a really good point. And does that fundamentally link to the 4 levels, whether it be improved livability, fully accessible, high physical support, robust, or again, not necessarily? Depends on the disability.
No, not necessarily at all. So as an example, if your service, and again, SDA is different to your service provision.
Yeah.
So if your care plan effectively has, let's say, 24/7 support.
Yes.
Why do you need OOA?
Got it. Got it. Yeah, good, the good point. Okay, so it's and again with any NDIS plan, it really depends because it could sometimes an NDIS plan can say you've got 2 to 1 during this day because functionally we've proven that you need that for showering, for example.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they're planned components.
Yes.
But then outside of that assessment, the OT might have assessed that it's unlikely that you will need care outside of that.
Right.
So therefore, you
Yeah.
won't qualify.
Yes.
However, if you're vulnerable, but you don't need the support all the time,
Mm.
then therefore you might qualify for the OA.
See,
So it really is.
I got told that. Sorry, Ian. Yeah, I got told that 78K figure the other day by someone. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So it's like 78K times 10 if you got the whole thing, but it ain't. Like, it really ain't. Sorry to interrupt. It's fascinating to know. You got to be careful, don't you? If you're going into this world, you'll understand the variables. Basically, that's my like aha moment here. Yeah,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
you know, reading the plans and reviewing the plans and better
Mm.
understanding those plans, oftentimes, and again, it's because there's the 6% is a small component of what the sector does.
Yes.
Um, a lot of support coordinators, a lot of service providers are just simply unaware
Yep.
of those nuances in
Yeah.
terms of those support provisions.
Yeah.
So and the
Yep.
OT is often removed in terms of what that might mean in terms of a care package.
Yep. Again, to add some little comments on this, because my entrepreneurial brain goes, right, okay, OOA, da da da. And this was my naivety until this conversation. I was like, right, if I'm going to have someone on 24/7, I need my A team. It needs to be someone that is trained in everything from dysphagia to stoma care, manual handling, because you never know. You've got 10 people to look after and they can have all
Correct.
sorts of needs, right? So you've got to have your
Yep.
A team. So if you have your A team, that means under SHADs, you've got to pay maybe level 2, pay point 2, which is a higher rate.
Yep.
So that's say $43 an hour for a casual. The point I want to make is that when I crunched the maths on that, because I love a good Excel, I was like, right, that's going to cost about $550,000 with superannuation included, just for the support worker component, never mind management. So it's a fair whack. And then if you even hypothetically, if you got 78K, which you're not by the sounds of things, per person, that's 780K against 550. So there's a lot of risk. So your break even point, even at 78K, is 7 participants out of 10. That's the math. That's the maths I did, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why I say, if
Yeah.
I mean the numbers that we've had in discussions with service providers, it's kind of 4, like
And that
at the
sounds a
bare
reasonable
minimum.
guess. Yeah, exactly. Because you don't know,
That's
because it might have variation and all that. Yeah. Wow.
yeah.
Thank you. It's
So
insightful.
what you're saying is really interesting in terms of the business model. On paper, it sounds astonishing,
Yes.
and we can all make any Excel spreadsheet look amazing, right?
Yes.
And then the devil's in the detail.
It is. Wow. Because I mean, of course, like, let's say you got a new development and you go, all right, Chris, your business is going to be the OOA. Super, super excited about that. And it would be. But you've got to know that you're basically committing to a $500,000 wage risk, roughly speaking. And then hopefully that then is the avenue, because you're also the OOA, to say, hey, we're amazing. Would you also like our services for the rest? Right. So it's kind of it's the foot in the door, but you have to, quite rightly, through choice and control, recognize that you could, in theory, get, cease services and any of that at any point. So, yeah, wow, interesting. Let me link this to the other ones, so the boutique ones, right? So let's say, I've seen some ones where it might be four 2-bedder units or whatever. So your boutiques, they do still also have the OOA room, but that makes me wonder, like, how would that, to what degree in is there flexibility? So like, let me say this as, I don't know if this is a myth or not. Let's imagine you're the OOA, there's only 4 units, even if you get all 4 people in and whatever, as in terms of budget. Is it possible for an OOA, as a provider, to go, hey, you guys have got, normal supports 12 hours a day, so therefore we're only going to do the other 12, we're only going to do the overnight. Can you use the full budget of the person's OOA to do a partial service as a provider, or is that a no-no?
Yeah, if you are providing partial service, you are
Yes.
meant to claim partial. So you shouldn't
Right.
be claiming the
Yeah.
full lot. Yeah.
Again, another
So it does vary.
it varies. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then that also then comes back to what are those people doing? Because obviously, if you're claiming on OOA, then you should only be doing OOA services. You shouldn't be doing other services during that period of time. So
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So obviously you need to make sure that that's the case. You can't, I'll just job cover that one at the same time and I'll
Mm,
claim both, but
mm.
only be providing one service.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So again, you got to know your stuff. This is kind of another alluding to you really have to understand the industry to be in it, not just as a
Yeah.
developer, but as the as the service provider too. Um,
And to be fair, I'm not a service provider. I really don't know anywhere near as much about service provision as you or your team do.
That's very kind. Well, I mean, look, it's a whole world. It's a labyrinth. Like, my goodness, you only learn more and more every day, often from your colleagues and through the experience of delivery, where you go, "Oh yeah, right, good distinction." I hadn't thought of that nuance. There's so much nuance in this industry. This podcast is brought to you in proud partnership between Peak Provider and Izango Care Partners. Izango is a system that I have used personally in my own business on the Central Coast, and do so today. It blows my mind in terms of what it can do in terms of the simplicity of the rostering process, both as an administrator in the back end at the management level, but also from a support worker point of view. I'm a believer that you should not have any pieces of paper as an NDIS provider, and that even your observational charts should be inside of a system such as Izango. And I'm happy to say it can do all of that and more. So if you're looking for something that allows you to do billing once a week at the click of a single button, or indeed export to Zero for payroll, it does all of that. But it goes even beyond that, and it starts to exceed many of the systems out there, because it gives the ability to manage concepts such as SIL houses, so property number 1, 2, and 3, and which participants are in that property and what staff belong to it, etc. You can match the skills and particular support worker preferences from one participant to a team of support workers, and you can even stop people from being rostered on from a compliance point of view if they've not uploaded their recent CPR certificate, etc. So all of that is just incredibly polished and works really well, and I can testify to that from a personal experience. But what it does is it does way more than that from a customization point of view. I've never met a IT provider that is not only willing to do customizations, but able to turn them around in a timely manner according to your very specific requirements. So if you're interested in signing up to Izango, check it out via Peak Provider. It can do everything from capturing data to tracking leads to creating participants based on all of that initial data, and ongoing administration. So don't have all these data points in various places that are disorganized. Have them in a central system such as Izango, and you will find that your administrational time gets cut in half. So inquire now via the link in the show notes below. This is something that Peak Provider highly recommends, and I hope that it does well for your business.
So that's why educational platforms like this and forums and get-togethers and those sorts of things are just so important for knowledge sharing.
Yes.
And that's actually what I've found very, very interesting about the sector is that it really is very collegiate.
Yes.
It's very collaborative. I have noticed some providers, often new to industry providers, are very guarded
Yes.
about what they're doing. They're less collaborative. Interestingly, I think that there's so much need within the sector that there's no need. I think a collaborative approach actually gets us to where we need to be much faster.
Correct. I almost see it like I'll take a spiritual perspective on that almost. I see it like, try and raise your higher level of consciousness here to say, like, there's more than, there's more than 600,000 people with disability across Australia. You only have to do a good job and you're going to be on average better. Right. You almost don't even, I don't want people to hear this the wrong way. You almost don't have to even be at best practice to be good. You just have to
Yep,
deliver on what you bloody say you're going to do and be competent. Right. Um,
correct.
yeah, and you'll be there'll be more than enough for you to grow your business. Interesting. Tell me about other trends. Are you seeing anything around, like, prefab, flat pack, 3D printing? Like, where do you reckon that's going to go?
Yeah, certainly the current pressures that we're seeing within the industry in terms of not only speed, so the demand that's there, but also the cost. We're definitely now seeing pressures big enough to help change habit.
Hmm.
So I think that a saying that says never waste a good crisis. And hopefully what's going to happen out of this one is that more prefabricated, modular, those sorts of opportunities come out of it. That I mean, time and time again in Europe and some parts of the US, building modular or prefabrication
Hmm.
is very, very, very well accepted. It's also proven to provide, in general, a far better outcome in terms of quality.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to provide better quality building products, built in a safer environment, such as a factory, and then quickly installed on site, actually helps ease a range of pain points. What I would flag is that at the moment, I have not seen the construction cost reduce. Certainly,
Really?
yeah, so the construction cost has not reduced at all in terms of using some of these methodologies. There is
Oh,
a there is a I don't want to say a myth. I think it should reduce the cost. However, I think that there is still risk. There's always risk in doing something new.
yep.
And as a result, I think what happens is the group that's believes that they're taking the highest risk as part of this process is generally the builder. And as a
Mm,
result, the builder tends to inflate its margin to then be able to cope if something goes wrong.
yes.
Now, that might change over the coming years as it becomes more accepted and as builders become far more proficient
Mm,
at using it, because the builder doing it this way with the same resources should theoretically be able to do more builds.
mm-hmm.
So that's one of the attractive components of it. If you halve your build time, then theoretically you should be able to do twice as many buildings.
I agree. I think it's early days, I reckon, in terms of the prefabrication. I'm sure it's going to mature. I know, for example, like even in my home office here, I've got windows from Poland, and they're double glazed, they're tilt and turn, and they were a fraction of
Yep.
the price. Because often it's not just about Europe, but there are a lot of European prefab manufacturers that, because they have to go through the bitter winters that Australia doesn't have, literally by definition, the insulation's better and all that kind of stuff. And of course, you've got China nearer to Australia. Like, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. But yes, it sounds like it's early days. Even if the cost is still the same, are you noticing that the construction times are reduced, just out of interest at the macro level, or not yet?
In some cases,
Okay.
I would
Okay.
say not quite yet, and the
Okay.
reason that I say that is because there have been, depending on where you're manufacturing, we've had some global events that have caused disruption to manufacturing. So if you look in China, while their industrial space is starting to improve, they had capacity issues, so power issues and capacity issues in terms of manufacture. Separately, if you look at, say, importing from Europe, that would necessarily negotiate navigating through the Red Sea. That's a fairly hot spot at the moment with the Houthi rebels out of Yemen. So
Yeah.
a lot of ships are no longer transiting via the Red Sea. They're going under the Cape, and as a result, they're adding 2 to 4 weeks worth of shipping time and cost to import things from Europe. So that's one part of the issue, and then the other part of the issue is because a lot of these products are prefabricated, you then need to be able to certify from a design point of view the actual application within Australia.
Yes.
So our design standards are very different because our geography and our climate are very different to other parts of the world. If we look at far north Queensland against a backdrop of, say, Victoria, in parts of Victoria, snow. In far north Queensland, we get cyclones.
Yes.
So if you look at it from a European point of view, the ability for somebody to get this certified in a country is generally easier than getting it certified in Australia.
Yes.
Now, the good thing there is once you're certified in a state, once you've been able to tick those boxes, then theoretically it's easier to get going. But again, it's hard. So there are more roadblocks to get this up and running. But
Mm.
as we just discussed, presumably as we get further down the track, more of these get rolled out. We're then able to roll through much faster.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Very insightful. Again, it's just it's another parallel to the advert you see online to go build your SDA home as land and house package. It'll be easy. It's the same thing with get a prefabricated home. It's really easy. Not always, there's a lot of detail. Let me ask you a kind of final trend question, I suppose. You also got the investor model, right? So again, when people talk about, oh, I'll become an SDA developer, there can sometimes be the assumption that you'll be the management company, i.e., the SDA provider, and also own the property. Whereas behind the scenes, so to speak, there can be a mixture, right? There can be SDA developers that are big and they own the properties themselves and they're self-financed, right? That's option one. Option two can be institutional finance, where they go, hey, Macquarie Bank, hey, Morgan and Stanley, here's $1 billion project, finance it, and off we go. And then thirdly, there's the SDA developer being literally only the management company, and you've got lots of private investors that can go, hey, I've got 50 acres, let's do something together. Where do you see this? I got two questions. What do you see the split of the market as, and what do you reckon the trend is?
Well, it's interesting. And there's a fourth one, which is,
Okay.
I guess, our model, which is we do the end to end. So effectively, we develop and then we'll construct with builders. Then we will effectively own and operate as the SDA. So all under the one banner, and we hold those properties indefinitely. Where do I see it? So I see a significant amount of institutional appetite
Yep.
for this kind of product. To use the term, it's a form of build to rent
Yep.
product. It's a form of stable income over a long period of time, which has an element of, Commonwealth. I'll use the term guarantee. It's not guaranteed, but there is an association that once a tenant is in place, the government will pay your rent.
Yes.
So there's a strength in terms of that investment, which appeals to a lot of those institutional investors. I think the other component is the ESG. So there's obviously some incredible social good that comes out of this, and as a result, a lot of funds, super funds, and institutional investors very interested in being able to contribute to that particular component. The difficulty with that is that these institutions, you just mentioned the number, have billions of dollars. They have billions and billions of dollars, and they are used to building big hospitals. They're used to investing in big shopping centres. They're used to doing, a single investment as $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
But the specific focus of the NDIA is salt and pepper approach. It's a smaller number of dwellings across the suburbs and fully integrated with community, because again, we want to move away from the thought of institutions.
Yep.
That forms a barrier for institutions to invest, because they're not going to invest in an $800,000 property.
No, not at all. It's too
little.
Yeah.
They need $800,000 properties to get them out of bed.
Yep.
So whilst there's a lot of interest, it's very hard for them to secure a considerable pipeline which gives them volume that then makes it worth their while.
Correct.
There are smaller funds. Barwon's a great example, and they're a great. They're not associated with us, but they come to mind as I guess, aligned with the sector. They're providing it for the right reasons, and they're a smaller fund. They're in the tens of millions of dollars, heading towards hundreds of millions of dollars, and they will be able to expand that fund. And they're growing slowly, and they're working with SDA developers that want to provide just the development. The institution then owns the property, and then there's an SDA provider, registered provider, then managing those properties ongoing. I think that there will be more of those funds coming online as we move forward into a more mature market. I think some of the barriers to entry are the NDIA themselves, and because this is a fast-moving and fast-changing sector, the NDIA necessarily knee-jerks a lot in terms of headlines. There's a lot of uncertainty in the sector in terms of funding. There's a lot of negative press out there about the NDIA and the sector and the amount of money that gets spent, etc. So if you're not in the sector, or you don't have the appetite for that insecurity, then you'll go to a different sector.
Yep.
Why would I invest in a sector where I don't know whether the government's going to pull the funding tomorrow? I may as well just stay and I'll just keep developing shopping centres as an example.
Yes.
Um, so to attract that money, I would say the government needs to be able to provide very, very clear indicators in terms of surety,
Yes.
and they haven't been able to provide that to date. Now,
Yes.
our view is that SDA will be here to stay.
Yes.
There's significant demand. There's a requirement for it. Service provision will be here to stay. There will be different flavors. There will be changes along the way. But as a theme, over the next 10 years, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going anywhere.
Yep.
It's going to be there. There
Yep.
will be some changes, but it's there.
Yep. I agree with that
I'm not sure.
distinction. And thank you. That's really interesting because, again, that provides a really lovely contrast to the mum and pop model, which, you can see the maturation of the industry broadly happening with SDA. And for a quick reference, I think I saw in an article that up in the Central Coast, I believe, is a building called the Archibald by Enliven Housing, and that's $675 million development, right? So that's an example of like, whoa, that's the proper end of things, so to speak, in terms of
Yeah.
institutional size.
Yeah.
Really interesting. And also in terms of the here to stay thing, as you were saying that, in my mind, all I could think of was crypto. Because like, imagine if you bought Bitcoin, you're going to have quite the stomach to kind of go up and down. And it's $100,000, it's $10,000. Oh my God, is it going to
Yeah.
go? Is it going to be banned? Living in the NDIS is a bit like that. And you've got to have a strong stomach. My other observation would be if I do a comparison to say support coordination and the trend towards the navigator role, that's an example of, there's definitely a lot of uncertainty there. It will evolve. We don't know yet. I agree that that's a crying shame that there's not, why would you kill off this wonderful function? Like, it's a whole debate in itself. But my point is that when it comes to accommodation and when it comes to what I would just call core supports, it doesn't matter what you name it. People are in need of personal care and community access, and they're in need of accommodation. So however it changes, I think those are the three core tenants are not going to change regardless what they get labeled as. So my
Exactly.
suggestion as a coach would be get into core supports and community access as a SIL provider or not as a SIL provider, because that ain't going to change. And then as you grow, get sophisticated enough to collaborate with SDA developers,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a range of different ways that you can grow your
Yes,
business
absolutely.
inside NDIA and outside of NDIA. There's a
Yes.
range of different service provision models.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. Look, let's finish off with a quick well, it's not so quick. I don't want to put pressure on you. Tell me about the flavor of Kinkera Community and how you guys are different, because I'd love the audience to hear the philosophy, because I was so impressed with this when we met for the first time a few years ago.
I think it's easy for people to say that we're different, as in not Kinkera, but just generally in the sector. Everybody says we're different because we provide the best dot dot dot. So a service provider will say we're different because we provide the best care. As an SDA provider, we say we provide the best property.
Okay.
Right. I, I don't know. It comes back to what you were saying before. I know people who have provided phenomenal properties, but they've been in the wrong location.
Mm-hmm.
The service provision isn't available in that particular area. And as a result, it's not a great experience anyway. So I think from our perspective, we're really, really keen to work with participants and genuinely wanting them to have the best outcome in our property. And our property, I'll say it, our property is great. I love our properties. They're getting better and better and better. The sidebar to that is if your service provision is working really, really well, why would you move anywhere else?
Yep.
It's kind of bring that together, and how do you create that? Once, and this is just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once shelter is secure and once you're confident about going about your own life, then you can start really building on these other items which consistently come up in every NDIA survey as being a shortfall, and that's employment and community.
Yep.
They're the two aspects that people with disability need and want.
Mm.
And it's amazing to see how things do start to change when there's stability of the care supports and the routine and the built environment, and how does that all then start to evolve and create possibilities for other things in the future.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I really start loving. And when I talk to some of my more inventive colleagues and co-workers, we start talking about a range of how can the gig economy, how
Mm.
can that impact people with disability? And there's just so many ways that that can really, really help. Um, and it's less, I think it's less to do with the income. And I think if even when you survey general market population, everybody wants to feel valued.
Mm.
Everybody wants to be part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And community means different things to different people.
Yep.
Being able to be part of it is just a we take it for granted, but for people with disability, there are barriers in place
Mm.
that don't allow that access, that equal access, right?
Mm.
So being able to really, really work in that built environment and creating a great built environment, and then working with service providers to make sure that care is great, then all of a sudden we can start building on these other aspects of community and employment that I think was the real tenet of NDIA when Julie Gillard and Bill Shorten launched it,
Yep.
that many years ago. I think that's really what they wanted. And we in some instances we are far, far away from it. I get
Mm.
it. In other ways, I look back 10 years ago and I go, wow, we are so close compared to where we were.
Yes,
Um,
I agree.
I'm not sure if I answered your question, and I'm
Oh no,
sorry
you
if I
did. You did, and it gives me
intentionally went off.
goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps because it's a heartfelt, deep-rooted philosophy that I know from collaborating within the industry that truly is the ethos that all of your team live and breathe. And the
Yeah,
Maslow reference is really meaningful because what I know is that from a psychology point of view, the Maslow hierarchy needs that you literally have to have your physical and security met in order to then move up the pyramid, so to
right.
speak. You cannot move
Yeah,
up until to love and belonging and community and eventually to self-actualization until you've
yes,
passed through the stage gates, right? So it's
exactly.
so insightful. If you can literally build that into the model, excuse the pun, then that's really meaningful. Couldn't agree more. Well, listen, on that high note, I think we'll wrap it up. So, I mean, Ian, thank you so much for coming on. It's Ian Jordan is the founder and director of and CEO of actually, yeah, of Kinkera Community, and I should have given you that proper introduction at the beginning. I'm so sorry, mate. But what we'll do is we'll put up the link to the website and what the organisation does in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been really insightful and strategically insightful, and also philosophically. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. I really appreciate your time, and I love the work that you do in the sector. I know the very, very first time that we met, it was from a genuine point of wanting to help.
Yes,
And I think that that was something that really, really engaged me in terms of you and what you do. And I love it. And I'm so glad that you're still cracking on.
yeah.
And congratulations to you and your family.
Thank you, mate. Thank you you're very kind, Ian. Very kind indeed. Well, listen, thanks to everyone. Thank you again, Ian. And subscribe, like, share, all that stuff. And I'm Chris Hall, and this is Ian Jordan from Kinkera Community. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode, everyone. Cheers. Once again, for a final reminder, this podcast was brought to you by Izango Care Partners in partnership with Peak Provider. Highly recommend checking out a demo. Click the show notes below and book yourself in to have a look at what the system can do.